All right, guys, welcome back to the Quick Breaks NBA DFS podcast. Of course, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy to Gens. As always, a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to try my best not to speed through this thing. But man, if I could really talk about this slate, it could probably take an hour. So much to talk about. It's such a good slate. There's so many good matchups, so many good options. It's just the lists are loaded. My goodness. Anyways, it's Friday. We have 11 games. It's a massive slate. It's one of the best ones that I've seen literally the whole year so far. It's going to be great for tournaments. I'm really excited, to be honest with you, if you can tell by my voice. Anyway, let's go ahead and hop into it. Like I said, we got 11 games. We got a lot to talk about. We'll talk about the games, talk about the spreads, talk about the totals. Game number 1, Pistons at the Pacers. We don't have a line right now. Obviously, Miles Turner is still questionable, seeing where he's going to be. Looks like Goga is out as well, so that's pretty interesting. Sabonis is probably going to be a monster once again, playing the Pistons here, who he's had a lot of success against. No line on that one. Grizzlies at the Magic. Orlando minus 5.5 here at home with a 209 total. Pretty low, about the lowest one on the slate. It is worth noting that the Grizzlies are 5th in terms of pace in the NBA at the moment, and the Magic are 28. So this is a pace-up spot a little bit. Obviously, we know the Grizzlies want to get up and run with that young core that they have. The Magic do not. So that's kind of a little bit of a storm that meets. So that's interesting. Cavaliers at the Wizards, 3rd highest game on the board as far as totaled. Washington minus 5.5 here at home, 230. Washington 8th in terms of pace, Cavaliers 21st. So again, another one that's kind of a perfect storm. But that one has a huge total. So, of course, both teams not exactly known for their defense. Magic actually play decent defense. That's kind of why that total is probably at 209. Game number 4, Kings at the Hawks. Sacramento actually a minus 1.5 road favorite here, 219 on the total. Kings 26th in terms of pace, Hawks 17th. Hawks are not exactly the team with pace that they were last year, but they still decently run with pace. Obviously, Trae Young is a big part of that, and I really like him tonight as well, as we know the Kings don't really defend the point guard spot that well. Moving on, Raptors at Pelicans. Here's the tied for the highest total on the board at the moment. There is 3 games without a line. That Warriors and T-Wolves that is coming up next doesn't have a line that I think will be really high. Either way, Raptors, Pelicans, Toronto minus 2.5 here on the road, 233. Pelicans ranked number 6 in terms of pace right now. Toronto is 12th. So, yes, this is a game you are going to want to circle. It's going to be very nice pace. A lot of good options in this one. We'll get to that later. Warriors at the T-Wolves. Like I said, there's no line on this one. Probably looking for, D'Angelo Russell, seeing if he's going to play. Excuse me, I'm talking too fast. That one's a good game, though. Wolves number 1 in pace. Golden State number 16th in terms of pace on the season so far. So that's a really good one we want to look at. Both teams, like I said, KAT is probably going to be massively owned. He should have a field day with the Warriors today at home. Knicks and Mavericks. Dallas minus 11.5 here at home, 216 on the total. We have, 2 teams really slow pace. Knicks 27th in terms of pace, Mavs 22nd. So pretty slow game. Higher total than I would have expected, but it seems about right. Again, Dallas big home favorite here over the Knicks, so that's kind of iffy. Biggest spread on the board, I should say. Next, we have the 76ers going to Denver in altitude to play the Nuggets. There's no line on this one. Waiting to see if Ben Simmons is going to play. He kind of hurt his shoulder, had an MRI. Everything came back clean. But this one's another one of those that's kind of perfect storm. You got the 76ers here ranked 7th in terms of total pace right now in the NBA, and the Nuggets are dead last. So this could be a pace-up spot for the Nuggets, maybe. I'm not really sure how, Philadelphia will be able to respond in altitude. That one's always something you got to watch for whenever, teams are playing in Denver, especially a high-paced team like the 76ers. They're going to get gas real early, you know what I mean? So one you need to look for and factor in. Next, we have the Bucks at the Jazz. Milwaukee minus 1.5 here on the road, 218 on the total. Bucks number 3 in terms of total pace, Utah 29th. Utah, like I said, is going back to that slow pace that they were, that grindhouse defense. I'm not sure what happened, but last year towards the end of the year, they were actually, in terms of pace, they were way up in the top 10. Interestingly enough, they are 29th. So small total there for the Bucks, but of course the Bucks run with tons of pace, number 3 in terms. So Interesting. Nets at the Blazers. Portland minus 2.5 here at home. 233 tied for your highest total on the board as well. Portland is on a back-to-back, but you have the Nets that are ranked 4th in terms of pace, and Portland ranked 9th. So two top teams, top 10 teams there in terms of pace. It's going to be a good one. Another late night West Coaster here with the Heat and the Lakers. Heat on the back-to-back. Heat let's see here. The Lakers are actually 8.5-point home favorite here. 215 on the total. That's crazy that they're almost a 9-point favorite here at home against the Heat. The Heat have been playing really well. The Heat actually gave Phoenix Suns their first loss last night, and I believe I didn't call it, but I said something about maybe the Suns getting their first loss on the Fantasy Alarm podcast yesterday with Mr. James Grande. Either way, they did get their first loss, and it was due to the Heat. Maybe they feel this is a spot where Heat could come out flat. Minus 8.5 is pretty big spread. So Lakers, like I said, 215 on the total. Heat on the back-to-back. Heat ranked number 10th in terms of pace. LA Lakers ranked 19th, who have actually jumped up a few spots. So that's interesting and something to monitor. And that was the last game on the slate. So, like I said, a couple good West Coast hammer there. Late night hammers on the slate. Obviously, that Nets and Blazers total is up there. So, with that being said, that's a rundown of the games. Let's go ahead and hop right into the point guard spot, which is absolutely stacked. My goodness, it's stacked. It's so stacked. LBJ at 10-6, 65.4 or more in his last 4 games on average. He's carrying a 31.9% usage rate on the season, 30.7 at home games. So the dude's just been massive lately, putting up triple-doubles left and right. I've been fading, and it's been very costly. Luka Doncic at 9.9, 31.2% usage on the season, averaging 54.9 in his last 4 games. Now, again, I need to reiterate that is a almost 12-point home favorite here. They are playing the Knicks. The Knicks are not very good. This game could get out of hand very easily, so be careful with Doncic. Dame at 9K. I don't think a lot of people are going to go here with them being on a back-to-back. Damian Lillard, even against the Clippers last night, still put up 43 fantasy points, I think. 49.5. Sorry. Yeah. No, 44.5. My fault. 44, almost 45 fantasy points last night against a really good Clippers defense, and I'm sure he got Pat Bev for a lot of the night. He's just good. I mean, I mentioned that yesterday in the playbook for Fantasy Alarm. I know he was going to get Pat Bev, but he's just a stud. Tonight, he's at home in a very big total game here, and like I said, he's getting the Nets and Kyrie, who doesn't really exactly play a lot of defense. So this could be the Kyrie Dame show easily. So Dame at 9K, averaging 53.3 fantasy points in his last 5, 27.8% usage in his last 5. He's carrying a 28.1% usage at home. No less than 42.5 fantasy points in every single game this year. Damian Lillard is probably one of my favorite spots. I hate the price, love the play. Trae Young at 8.9, Sacramento allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the point guards. Had a real bad dud last game, so I'm hoping everybody jumps ship, which they probably won't. Averaging 42.5 fantasy points for the year, 35.2% usage rate at home on the year. So that's pretty massive. With Collins out, it's going to continue to rise. It's going to continue to rise and go up. He's going to continue to take shots. He's been dishing out a lot of dimes. I think last game or the game before, he had like 9 assists in the first quarter and had like 2 points. And then he still ended up with it was the night that he went for 50 fantasy points in his first game back. And then he erupted and had went nuts. Either way, the dude's dishing out a lot of assists. He's scoring really well. He's good. So at 8-9, totally fine with Trae Young. Malcolm Brogdon, it seems like I keep repeating this story over and over again, different chapter. Tonight against Detroit, who doesn't have a point guard, literally playing Bruce Brown. Looks like both Derrick Rose and Reggie Jackson are out again. Tim Frazier is questionable, which I will take. I will take Malcolm Brogdon over Tim Frazier in a matchup every day of the week. Averaging 45.2 fantasy points in his last 5, 46.6 average on the season. He's been a monster, 25.5% usage at home. If Miles Turner's out again, even with Sabonis back, he still put up, I think, 40 fantasy points last game. Totally fine with Malcolm Brogdon here. 8.3. His price doesn't raise. seems like all these other guys, I guess maybe it is because his upside is somewhat limited and capped because of guys like T.J. Warren taking 20-something shots, Sabonis, with his high usage. But still at 8.3, and he's averaging, 46.6 fantasy points on the season. Malcolm Brogdon is doing very, very good this year. Kyle Lowry at 8.3, 24% usage on the road. Obviously, New Orleans is allowing the most fantasy points to the point guard spot. This is a huge pace-up spot for the Raptors going into New Orleans, averaging 44.3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And again, it's not exactly it is. It's the highest total on the board. It is, and the Pelicans don't play a lot of defense. So, of course, it's right back to those Raptors mini stacks with I even like Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry, and Pascal Siakam here. OG Anunoby is in play. So all the Raptors basically, other than Marc Gasol, who just stands there and doesn't do much. Actually, Marc Gasol has been kind of turning around and playing well lately, so I'm going to step back. I'll retract my statement. Anyway, Lowry at 8.3, love the price. De'Aaron Fox at 8K, over 35 minutes or more in his last 5, 28.4% usage on the season, 28.3% usage on the road. So he's averaging right around 28% usage even on the road. He's been playing really well, averaging 40.8 fantasy points in his last 5 games. He gets a great matchup here with Trae Young. Obviously, we know Atlanta doesn't guard the guard well. So De'Aaron Fox at 8K, I think take the savings, and he's a great tournament play, obviously. Like I said, averaging 40 right around almost 41 fantasy points in his last 5 games. So, one that I'll be looking for, Jeff Teague at 5'7", if he plays. Obviously, he was out, for an illness is what it says. I guess everybody's getting the bug lately. Golden State allowing the second most fantasy points to the point guard spot, 20.3% usage at home. You got fast-paced game here, obviously, with the, Minnesota playing, being the number 1 pace team in the NBA at the moment. Jeff Teague, I think, will go under the radar. Golden State's going to have to either start Kai Bowman or D'Angelo Russell if he plays. And if D'Angelo Russell plays, I absolutely really like Jeff Teague. Obviously, on the flip side, I'm going to like D'Angelo Russell as well because Teague can't really defend if he plays. So that one's kind of a one to look for on both sides. Again, Kai Bowman at 5.5. If Teague plays, I'm totally fine with it. It seemed like, last game when they started Culver and Okogie and Wiggins, they clamped down a little bit better on defense. So I don't know if that's something I want to attack if Teague doesn't play. Either way, Kyle Bowman, 36 or more minutes in his last 3 games without D'Angelo Russell, double-digit field goal attempts in every single game, and he's had at least 4 more assists in every game. So he's putting up decent numbers. He's only 5.5K in one of the highest pace games, highest total, highest pace in the whole board. So Kyle Bowman, I think I'll be totally fine with. Again, if Teague plays, it'd be a little bit better. Last but not least, a little bit of a value play here again at 5.5. Colin Sexton, averaging 26 or more fantasy points in his last 5 games. Washington's allowing the second most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot. Second most fantasy points to the point guard spot. First, the most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot. So Colin Sexton usually starts at the 2 guard. They're allowing the most fantasy points to shooting guard spot. So Colin Sexton at 5.5. Third highest total on the board here. I think I'm totally fine with that at value. Colin Sexton at 5.5, maybe even Jordan Clarkson. He's down the list. I just didn't put him on the list. Wanted to play Colin Sexton because he usually gets, around 30 minutes a run. So he's been actually playing a little bit better lately. So Colin Sexton, I'm totally fine with. Moving on to the shooting guard spot, Brad Beal, no surprise, 8'6", averaging 46.1 in his last 4. Cleveland allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot. We've been fading that shooting guard spot from the Cavs for, like I said, ever since J.R. Smith was there. So, 4th most of the shooting guard, 8th most of the point guard. Cleveland's not a very good defensive team. 33.1% usage on the season for Mr. Beal. So, sure, 8.6. I don't know why his price is that low. Drew Holiday at 7'9", 22.7% usage in his last 4, 37.3 or more fantasy points in his last 3 games. Actually, he's averaging 37.3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Again, high pace, high total, Toronto. Totally fine with Drew Holiday. Donovan Mitchell at 7.7. His last 2, 55 and 42.8 fantasy points, 30.2% usage, pace up spot here with the Bucks. If there is a weak spot probably on that Bucks team, it's the shooting guard spot. It's because they, don't really It's just a spot that is not filled by somewhat of a stud. You got Bledsoe, Brolo, of course, Giannis, and then Middleton, whatever. Kevin, why did I say Kevin? Is it Kevin? Okay. Anyway, whatever his name is. Of course, Donovan Mitchell, totally fine with here at 7-7 in this pace-up spot at home. Jimmy Butler at 7.4K. Of course, all DraftKings pricing. Hope you know that. 47 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4, 25.6% usage in his last 4, averaging 42.9 in his last 5. Jimmy Butler is coming alive. The guy's been playing really well. Of course, on a back-to-back, but totally fine with it. Almost broke the slate last night. We were on him last night as well. Wiggins, 3 straight, 20-plus real points, even with Karl-Anthony Towns coming back last game. Over 34 fantasy points in his last 3. Golden State's allowing the 8th most fantasy points to that shooting guard small forward spot, and he's carrying a 27.4% usage rate at home. Wiggins has been playing well. He's right around that 7K mark, 6.9, I think. I'm totally fine with him in this game. Pace-up spot, of course, really, really high total. Totally fine with Andrew Wiggins. If Teague plays, he's still been playing. He's still been playing well, even with Teague. So I think I'm fine with Wiggins. Buddy Hield at 6.7. I think a guy that'll go under the radar here. Atlanta allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the shooting guard spot, averaging 31 or more fantasy points in his last 5. 25.8% usage on the road. Buddy Hield is a guy that could actually absolutely pop off tonight in Atlanta. You would think that game would probably be decent pace. I know that in terms of pace, the way they rank is not great, but I think I'm totally fine with Buddy Hield at 6.7 here. I'm going to want to have a little bit of that game, of course. I want to correlate a little bit, so Buddy, I think, will actually be in that mix. Luke Kennard at 6.2, over 32 minutes in his last 5, 3 straight, over 33 fantasy points. He's been playing tons of minutes, been getting lots of run, seeing decent usage. Not the greatest matchup with Indiana, but, if you're looking for a little bit of value in that mid-tier, Luke Kennard at 6.2, I'm totally fine with. CJ McCollum had his price lowered, $6K. Give us the discount, baby. Let's go, CJ. Let's do it at home. 35 fantasy points last night. Brooklyn 9th most to the shooting guard spot. 25.2% usage last night. Like I said, Dame even went off and probably carried closer to 30, and CJ still put up 35 fantasy points. And guess what? He took 26 shots. Again, I can't say it enough. He's going to shoot. He is going to shoot the ball. He is 6K playing at home tonight in one of the highest total games on the board. Play CJ McCollum. That's all I got to say. Burks, 5.2. Alex Burks for the Warriors. 31 minutes last game against Houston. Put up 47. Fast-paced game here. 25.5% usage in his last 2. He has to be that spark plug off the bench for Golden State. They have to have him. He's going to continue to get the usage. Totally fine with Alec Burks. Jarrett Culver, if Teague is out again at 5K, played 30 minutes last game. They have no point guards. He put up 32.8 fantasy points. Obviously going to be a great matchup here with Golden State at home. So if Culver, if Teague's out, I'll be looking at Culver at 5K, 30 minutes last game, 32 fantasy points. I'm totally fine with Jarrett Culver. Last but not least, Troy Brown at 4.4. He may start. We don't know yet. We know that they said that there was going to be a roster change. So if Troy Brown does happen to start, I'm likely thinking he'll probably, start at the 3 maybe and get some time at the 2 with, Bill shifting to the point guard spot, Cleveland allowing the forward most of that shooting guard spot, and they're not great against a small forward spot. So Troy Brown Jr. at 4.4 if he starts, you kind of got to look that way, right? All right, moving along. Small forward, Giannis, 11.5. Man, his price is up there. He's just been murdering folks. This is not exactly the best spot playing in Utah with a team that's almost third to last ranked pace. I'm not exactly a huge fan. I'll probably fade because that's just my nature. So that's me. You can do what you want. Brandon Ingram at 8.1. 56 fantasy points last game. Toronto is actually allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the small forward spot. I know he doesn't exactly play just a true 3. He plays a little bit of 4, plays a little bit of point guard. Either way, I want some Ingram. The dude's he's good. He's really good. 8.1, I'm totally fine. Jonathan Isaac, over 30 minutes in his last 3. 25.8, 33, and 53 fantasy points. Put up 53 fantasy points last game. Great matchup here with Memphis at home. Isaac he almost pulled off a 5x5, which, at least 5 of all stats. The dude's been just a monster. He's a categories beast. He's going to stuff the sheet. And his price is slowly going up, so you might want to jump on that train before it gets over the 7K mark. Bogdanovic at 6.4, over 32 fantasy points in his last 3, over 37 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3 at home. I wanted to note that as well. Of course, Utah playing against the Milwaukee Bucks at home here. This one could slip by, be a little bit under the radar. If that game does happen to turn into a faster-paced game like I anticipate that it might. So 6.4 on Bouillon, I'm fine with. TJ Warren at 6.1. We know Detroit's not very good. Over 32 minutes in his last 3 games. He's put up 38.8, 48.5, and 32 in his last 3 games. Looks like his production dropped off a little bit there with the bonus coming back. So I'll be kind of cautious, but, he's still there. Taurean Prince at 6K. Portland allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the small forward spot. Over 41 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. High total here, of course, in that late night game. Taurean Prince, I think if you're going to stack up that game, has to be a part of it. Josh Hart, 5'6", 26 or more minutes in every single game this year, 31.6 and 41.3 in his last 2. I kind of mentioned that Toronto's allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the small forward spot, so this bodes well for Josh Hart, who's going to be playing probably quite a bit of 3 tonight. Totally fine with Josh Hart at 5'6" as part of that game. Will Barton, averaging 35.5% in his last 3, averaging 35.5 fantasy points in his last 3 games, right around a smidge of 20% usage at home, 38.5, 37.8, and 30.5 in his last 3. I know it's Philadelphia, but I kind of like Barton at home here for this price, like a little smidge over 5K. Totally fine with Barton there. All right, so that's it for the small forwards. Rolling over to the power forwards. AD doesn't really need a whole lot of description. 10-1 tonight. Averaging 53 fantasy points in his last 4. Averaging 51, almost 52 fantasy points for the season. Had a dud last game against Chicago, so I'm sure everybody's going to go jump back on the train. I don't blame you, but I'm going to be looking at Kevin Love at 9-3 here for a huge bounce-back game. Washington, not very good. Cleveland, I'm totally fine with Kevin Love here at 9-3. Washington allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the power forward spot. Rui's good, but you're going to have a tough time with Kevin Love tonight. They don't have a Marcus Smart that can guard Kevin Love and make him only put up 30 fantasy points. Look for Kevin Love to go for 50 or more tonight. I'm calling it right now. Pascal Siakam at 8.8. Again, part of that, Toronto stack. Don't really have to talk much about him. 48.3 or more fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. Put over 50 fantasy points in his last game. He's heating back up. Again, gets a non-defensive team here, really, with the Pelicans. So, totally fine with Pascal Siakam. Porzingis at 7.6 at home. Again, kind of the same, story with Doncic with that really high spread, 11.5. But revenge narrative, right? You got New York coming to town. You got the revenge spot for Porzingis, and he's only 7.6K. He's going for 40+. New York allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the power forward spot. He's going for 40+. Porzingis 7.6, lock it in. Julius Randle, interestingly enough, on the other side, guess what? He's from Dallas, and he loves playing in Dallas. Guess what? 6.9, averaging 31 fantasy points on the road so far this season. I highly think that he's going to be motivated to play in Dallas tonight. So, back at home, getting to see his boys. Get Randall in there as well. Jabari at 6'4", last 3, over 30 fantasy points, 25-plus minutes in his last 3 games. He's just one of those guys that's, thrusted into a starting role now. Gets a decent matchup with the Kings, so totally fine with Jabari. Harrison Barnes on the other side. 5'9", 40 minutes or more in his last 3 or 4, over 30 fantasy points in his last 4. Been a staple of consistency. Totally fine with Harrison Barnes. For the sake of not making, like I said, this thing an hour or too long, I hate to say that I didn't dive too far into the lower price guys. I just really wanted to give you guys the best options kind of up around the top. Obviously, we'll talk in the Degen Slack chat. You guys from Fantasy Alarm will be chatting in the chat all day, so we will talk about value, guys. Don't worry. I'm not going to leave you guys hanging. But for right now, that ends the power forward. Going over to the center spot, Andre Drummond at 10.5. Don't really need to talk about that one. He's good. Joel Embiid, I like quite a bit. 10-4 here. I'm not sure how they will respond here. Like I said, in altitude, going to Mile High in Denver. So that's interesting. But, man, Denver has given up a lot of big games to the center spot. Joel could easily have a big game. 56, 33, and 67 in his last three. Can't really deny him. He's been good. Karl Anthony Towns versus Golden State at home here at 10-3. I mean, it's just a total smash spot. I don't I don't really need to talk about that one. Sabonis at 8-7, 42 or more fantasy points in his last four. Obviously, if no Turner again, he's going to be absolutely smashing again. Detroit, even with Drummond, still not very good against the center spot, so Sabonis, of course. Rudy Gobert, quietly, 43 or more fantasy points in last two of three. Against Milwaukee here, who's allowing the fifth most fantasy points, and he's going to go zero owned. He's going to go zero owned at 8.2. Fifth most fantasy points to the center spot versus Milwaukee. Again, and 43 or more fantasy points in his last two or three. Rudy Gobert is very sneaky. Very, very sneaky. Tristan Thompson, 7.5 versus Washington. Yes, please. Hassan Whiteside, price didn't even move. He just put up, close to 40 fantasy points last game. Had 19 rebounds yesterday. Last game. We were all over him. He was my roster monster yesterday as far as the Slack chat for the Degens. I told everybody to build around him, Kawhi, and Rubio, and it played out well. My best lineup went for almost 308 last night. Went for 307.75. I cashed pretty decently last night. So, Whiteside at 6.5 versus Brooklyn here, who doesn't play defense that well. Maybe they start DeAndre Jordan. I don't really care. Hassan Whiteside said that he wants to be the leading rebounder. The dude's just been smashing lately. He's back at home tonight. Give me Hassan Whiteside at 6.5K versus Brooklyn. 36 or more fantasy points in his last three. Absolutely. Last but not least, Rashawn Holmes here versus Atlanta, who doesn't rebound well at 5'8". Totally fine with some Rashawn Holmes. He's played, over 30 minutes in his last two or three, or 2 of 3, or 3 or 4. I can't remember. Either way, it's a good spot. It's a great spot. He has a decent price. I wish it was a little cheaper. However, I don't think you can really ignore it. All right. So 26 minutes is what I got this thing in. I was glad. I was hoping to get it under 30. That's my aim. Every slate, any slate, I don't care if it's 20 games. That's why I labeled this thing Quick Bricks. It's because I want it to be quick, fast. I want to give you everything that I found as quick as possible. Hopefully I talked fast enough. Hopefully everybody smashes tonight. We still have lots to talk about later, so we will be actively in chats talking about the slate tonight. 11 games. Love it. Really excited. So have a great Friday. And then let's get ready for the weekend. Have a good day at work if you're working today. And let's chat about some basketball later.